You first hire the leaders who will help you to build a team instead of trying to build the team yourself, because it's very hard, especially when you're growing very fast. And I would say spend a lot of time, dedicate a lot of time finding very diverse leaders who have very distinct backgrounds in all senses. And then they will help you to make the team diverse and make everybody heard. If you speak the truth and you speak about that and you talk about this topic with your leadership team, in my case, I have 3 people in the leadership team, they will reproduce it, they will do the best work as possible, and they will hire people in the same, vein, in the same type of approach that you did originally.
Welcome to Latinx in Power, a podcast hosted by Thaisa Fernandes.
Welcome to Latinx in Power. Today we are talking with Koji Pereira. Koji is an experienced chief design officer who has led teams at companies such as Neon, Twitter, and Google. He has a strong user-centric approach, strives to build diverse and inclusive teams, has launched products that have scaled to billions of users while elevating designers to strategic thinkers. Welcome to this podcast, Koji.
Thank you for having me, Thaisa.
In this episode, Koji will share his insights on various design leadership topics, such as his approach to scaling up UX teams while launching consumer-facing products, building diverse and inclusive teams, measuring the success of a design project, and mentoring and coaching designers on his team. Very exciting conversation. And Koji, do you consider yourself a Latino? And if yes, what does it mean to be a Latino for you?
Yes. Well, I do consider myself a Latino. Living in US, it became very clear to me that I am part of Latin America. That's where I was born, and identify myself as part of the community where many people grew up in a part of America that was exploited and not necessarily had the same access that people had in the North America or the Anglo-Saxon America.
And what does it mean to be a Latino for you?
To me, being a Latino means that I care about things, or I lived in contexts that many other people that I know, that I worked with, may not have the same experience. So to me, for instance, it means that I had to move out of my country. I have to apply for a visa. I have to go through interviews where people maybe judged me by the specific way I talk or my accent. So to me, it means these things, but also means that I identify myself with the people in Latin America who I grew up with, who I believe have a good heart, and they're definitely, welcoming, and we have our own ways to do things and to live and to share experiences.
Thank you for sharing. I like that you mentioned the challenging things and also the welcoming part, the good things, I guess. And what initially drew you to the field of design, and what do you find most fulfilling about your work?
I started with design at young age. I always liked to draw and to paint as a kid. And then as I grew up, I was, okay, this seems to be something that can be, directed to a specific place in my career that doesn't need to be necessarily art, which was actually my undergrad. And then I discovered design, which to me made a lot of sense because I always had this side of myself where I was a little bit more on the mathematics, the exact things, the logical thinking, and then another side of myself, which was very artistic, very exploratory. And design to me is the mix of these two things. So initially, my experience was with graphic design back in 95, and I started by doing posters and album covers for bands. And then at that time, a few years after, 97, the internet was becoming a thing in Brazil. So I started to build websites for bands. And that's when I actually transitioned to what we call back then web design or interactive design, and which today, evolved to be more like product design or UX design.
Very, very cool. I like what you said about design being the mix of this more logical, strategic part, but also the artistic side. That's very interesting. I never thought about that. And I know we quite often now, especially now, you're always talking about scaling. And I think scaling, it's a great challenge for many different industries. So I'm curious to know more. How do you approach scaling up UX teams while launching consumer-facing products?
Yeah, so scaling up design to start with, it's all about processes and creating a design system which can help a company to reduce the stress of rebuilding components and rebuilding ways to design all the time. So having a design system is the first thing you have to think about.
What is the design system?
Design system is basically, to summarize, it's a way to transform design for product into something that can be reproduced and scale up as a product internally. So imagine that you have a button. That button doesn't need to be recreated all the time. So you create a mini feature or a product for that button where you have rules. Let's say if that button is applied under a dark theme or a dark background, then that button is one color, it's a brighter color. If that button is in a brighter background, then that button will be a darker blue color. And then you have, let's say, 3 different sizes of buttons, like a small button, a secondary button, a primary button. So all the schemes or patterns that you apply to a specific component, that starts to build up what a design system is. But more importantly, the design system is the connection between design and implementation, because for each of those components, you have a component on Figma where designers can drag and drop like a specific item. But also on the engineering side, you have a snippet of code where front-end engineers can reuse that specific component, and that's part of the design system, is both the digital visual side of it on Figma and then also the code component for that specific item.
Very cool. Do you think there's a way to scale design without a design system?
No, I don't think so. I think either you have to have your own design system or you have to adopt one. So for instance, there is a lot of open source design systems like Material Design from Google. And again, like if you don't do that, then every time you build a screen, you're kind of rebuilding the same elements on the screen. So it's not scalable. It's definitely not something you want to do. And I would say you have to have a design system.
How do you approach scaling up UX teams while launching consumer-facing products?
So scaling up the team, it's very important that first you identify how big the team will be in, let's say, 1-2 years, right? Like you're talking about a team of 20 people, 300 people, 15 people. And of course, to understand that, you need to also make sense of the size of the company in 1 or 2 years. What kind of challenges do you have? There's not really a recipe for that, but you have to look at many, many things to understand how big the design team needs to be. Then you have to understand, okay, from the things I want to do, what kind of profiles do I need here? Sometimes you will need someone who will be more like a visionary designer who think about the vision for your product within 5 years. And sometimes you just need someone who will create an operation to deliver fast results, right? Like those are very different types of designers. And you also have like different types of skills, people who are more prototypers, people who are more visual designers. So all of that will create different spectrums of designers, and that plus the amount of designers will give you a sense of how your team will look like. Then I think the last thing that to me is very important is to think about the structure. How do you want to shape your design org? And that could be a centralized design org, which right now it's quite, I would say, trendy. Like most of the medium-sized, large-sized companies, they have centralized design teams, meaning that design, research, content design all report to one CDO or Chief Design Officer or VP of Design. But you also have cases where a company is too big and you have to have a decentralized design org, for instance, at Google or some companies like Stripe, I believe. Not actually Stripe, but Square. It's also decentralized, meaning that you have a general manager and everybody that works in that specific organization or business unit will report to a specific general manager. In that case, designers report also to a general manager for each specific business unit.
That's very cool. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we didn't bring this topic yet to this podcast. I'm very excited about that. And actually don't see a lot of talks about design leadership in general. And never saw one by a Latino. So I'm very excited with this conversation and congratulations to you. And another topic that I want to bring is, can you tell us more about how you build diverse and inclusive teams and what steps you take to ensure all voices are heard?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's always a learning experience and you're improving over time and learning how to do that. I don't think there is like a silver bullet solution for it. But the first thing to me, and I am of the school that you first hire the leaders who will help you to build a team instead of trying to build the team yourself, because it's very hard, especially when you're growing very fast. And I would say spend a lot of time, dedicate a lot of time finding very diverse leaders who have very distinct backgrounds in all senses. And then they will help you to make the team diverse and make everybody heard. You know, if you speak the truth and you speak about that and you talk about this topic with your leadership team, in my case, I have 3 people in the leadership team, they will reproduce it, they will do the best work as possible, and they will hire people in the same, vein, in the same type of approach that you did originally. So that's one thing. Another thing is in the US, you cannot do that, but in Brazil, you can open affirmative job openings and say, okay, this is a affirmative role for, African Americans or for a woman. And that makes it not very easy, but easier to hire diverse talent. In US, what I would say is whenever you're growing the team, make sure that everybody in the team can make a referral for that specific role. In that way, you're going to get way more diverse pool of people instead of just having you or a couple of people making referrals. Other than that, I think once you hire people, because hiring, honestly, is not even the hardest part. I think the hardest part is once they are hired, how you make everybody feel like they belong. And for that, what I would say is make sure that people can bring difficult points of view that are uncomfortable and maybe not very popular. If you make people feel like they can bring any topic to the table, then it makes it easier and more comfortable to, be responsible and be accountable for how things are and how things could be better. And if you have that transparency, if you have that dialogue, even if you're not perfect, and I'm pretty sure your team won't be perfect at any point, at least you're committed to listen, learn, and improve.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think those 2 tips serve to a lot of things in life. First one, you don't need to do all the work by yourself. In this case, you can hire people that will continue and achieve the goal with you. And also, don't be afraid to have different conversations, difficult conversations. So you can apply that to a lot of things. That's very insightful. I love that. And another interesting topic that I wanted to bring is the measuring part. How do you measure the success of a design project, and what metrics do you use to evaluate its impact on the organization?
Yeah, that's a very common question. My answer is that I've tried many ways to do that with internal metrics, and all of them are either insufficient or not satisfactory for me, not complete. So to me, the actual best way to measure success of a design team is by looking at the product, is by looking at the results of changes that the design team led. And it's hard because, of course, there's many teams involved in the process in most of the products that we launch. But I think there's ways to kind of say, hey, this specific project is very important for design, and design is either driving it or they have a very strong say on how the final product will look like. And this could be a launch of a new version of the design system, the implementation of a design system, the redesign of, let's say, main screens or main flows, or the relaunch or the launch of a new product or a new feature that was mostly done because of the user experience depth or because the user experience was very important to that launch. And if I will give an example, let's try to get an example of Facebook, right? Like if I am to measure the impact of design team on Facebook, I would probably look at, for instance, the profile page or how many people are, organizing their profile page or putting down informations about themselves in the profile page, meaning that they're engaged and they're interacting with the customization of the profile page. This is just an example, right? Like in that case, if the engagement goes higher, it means that yes, the design team is successful and they built upon a hypothesis, they did research, and they designed and implemented a new version of the profile edition edit mode that increase engagement. So again, to me, the best way to measure design success is by looking at the product metrics and trying to, as much as you can, isolate the parts that the design team had a stronger say or a stronger influence.
Very, very cool. I really like this conversation about measuring design. And how do you approach mentoring and coaching designers on your team? And what strategies have you found to be effective in helping them grow in their careers?
I think it's first to be honest on what you know and what you don't know. So there are some things that you know as a leader, and there are certain things that you don't know. And it's okay to say, hey, I don't know about this, but I will look up and I'll try to find, the solution or find that specific information. So being honest is maybe the first step. The second step to me is taking 100% of the accountability of the things that are related to your team, even when you're not sure if you're the person to be accountable. And I'll explain that why. Because you want to set example that you're not afraid of taking accountability. You're not afraid of, being responsible for your acts and even for acts that are coming from the team, but you're the leader and you're accountable for that. So you want to set the example. And the third thing to me is, again, creating the space for people to challenge you, bring difficult points, bring points of disagreement, and making the space to listen to people, even if you don't have an answer, even if you don't agree, even if you just to listen, So to me, those are the three most important things. So listening, being responsible for your acts and the acts around you, and just making sure that people have the space to ask you questions, even when you don't have all the answers, even when you don't have, all the full big picture of everything. So being fully honest about it.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. And in this podcast, we are all about sharing journeys and learning with each other. So is there any resource that you would like to mention that helped you in your journey? It can be anything design related, not design related, any resource?
Yeah, for design, I really like the Design of Everyday Things was the first book that I read about design. Very easy book to read. It gives you very interesting ideas of how design can impact our lives, good design and bad design. In terms of leadership, I think probably the book that I liked the most was Emotional Intelligence because it gives you a very like scientific basis on how emotional intelligence can actually make a big difference in your work relations, in your personal relationships too. And just doing a lot of like exercise and therapy and I think meditation, all of those things, I think it helps a lot too. And they're definitely very important if you are under a lot of pressure, if you're under a lot of like difficult work to do every day, use those resources in order to make sure that you're safe and you feel like in your best self and you can act on things with clarity.
Incredible. I love those two books. Really good recommendations. And we love when people talk about therapy in this podcast. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. And I'm going to leave the last minutes for you to share anything you want to share and where people can find you.
Okay, so I think the easiest is my LinkedIn, Koji Pereira. I also have a website, but there's not much there. It's more about the work I did. And in terms of messages, I would say don't, feel afraid of taking the hard decisions in your life. I think we are in a moment where there's a lot of uncertainty and people feel afraid of moving in the wrong direction. But it's very important to make sure that you won't regret of the things you're doing. So make sure that you're very intentional and you doing the things that you believe are right, even when things are difficult or uncertain like it is today. So that's it.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you.